I recently watched a movie on Netflix called The Wrong Missy, and the main male character slept in the same bed with a girl he is not interested in the least, but she was under the impression that he was into her. He later wakes up to her riding him, and honestly, as a girl, I would have felt extremely violated had I been in his situation and could possibly pass this up as sexual harassment or assault. However, the dude did not seem that bothered by it. Is this a fluke on the movie's end, or do some of you consider it okay? I am okay with surprise morning sex, but only if I got verbal agreement from my partner beforehand and vice versa. My boyfriend explicitly told me he likes waking up to oral sex, and others, so I feel okay doing it. He gave me his consent. In cases where you are not a couple and have not had that conversation, when does it cross the line from welcome to sexual assault? Would you consider what the woman in the movie did okay? Or would you also feel violated? Story 1, you have to communicate it beforehand. I allowed my girlfriend to wake me up with something sexual, but I'd feel violated if a stranger did it because it is assault. Story 2. I've seen this movie, and earlier in the film, she also gives him a hand while he is asleep on a plane after she forcibly gave him sleeping pills or something similar. Everyone surrounding the act says nothing. It supposedly goes on for 40 minutes before he wakes. Reverse this role, and you will see the original poster's point entirely. Reverse the whole movie, and you start to think of it more and more. It's an accepted act with males and not females, and it's dead wrong in my opinion. Story 3. It's really weird how this is a double standard. Men are often expected to want sexual attention and activities. Therefore, consent from men is often neglected and assumed to be true by default. It's really messed up, but I think that it's at least partially because men are not raised in a community where they are told that they can be raped. After a night out, young girls are often followed home and told to get a cab. Many guys are just told to get home. Men are also less often part of forced rape by physical overpowering, but society forgets they are just as vulnerable to manipulation and such as a superior at work or a teacher. But in my experience, many men seem to care somewhat less about uninvited sexual attention and activities, maybe because they feel less threatened. I don't know, maybe that's it. Also, this doesn't mean all men, but at least the people I know well. Story 4. Honestly, I'd feel violated. Movies somehow try to portray men as just sex-hungry, brainless idiots, and I feel like although these people exist, it's a very small fraction of all men. If you're not sure if something sexual would be okay to do, reverse the roles, and if it's not acceptable, it shouldn't be for both genders. Story 5. It's rape. Men are taught that they should like it. It's the same thing as if it happened to a woman. And yeah, there are going to be occasional men and women who are okay with sexual assault or like it, but that's probably only specific situations and there's no way to tell if they'd be okay with it or not. Story 6. It's rape, and most guys would process it that way, but probably never say so without copious amounts of liquor because we are not supposed to. If somehow consent has been established beforehand, I guess it could be fine. But I do not think that would ever strike me as perfectly okay. The guy can always wake up and say, "What the heck? Get off." Even if he was okay with it the night before. Story 7. If one party didn't want it, that's assault. It's sadly Hollywood's way of trying to make it seem like guys either can't be assaulted or if they are, it's for laughs. See the rape scene in 40 Days and 40 Nights for another example. Story 8. I would love to be woken up with oral affection from a girlfriend, wife, or one-night stand, regardless of whether we've ever had a discussion about it. It varies per person. In my case, I don't consider it unacceptable. I think it's fantastic. But I can see how others would feel that way. Obviously, there's no way of knowing if someone likes it or not without asking them, so you should probably ask ahead of time to prevent any misunderstanding, assuming they are not comfortable with it. Story 9. Unfortunately, I never found myself in the situation where I was woken up by sex. I tend to believe it would be great, hence I said unfortunately, but who knows? Maybe it would really feel violating. It would probably entirely depend on my relationship and trust with the girl in question. Story 10. The main male character slept in the same bed with a girl he is not interested in at all, but she was under the impression that he was interested in her. He later wakes up to her on top of him. This is rape. However, the man didn't seem that bothered by it. Is this an oversight in the movie, or do some people consider it acceptable? This is very bad writing by a team of writers who don't understand consent and instead follow the toxic idea that all men are always willing to have sex with all women. My boyfriend explicitly told me he likes waking up to oral sex. There's a very clear difference here compared to the scenario from the television series. In the show you describe, the two were not a couple, they presumably haven't had sex before, and because he didn't like her but she thought he did, they weren't even properly communicating. Everything between you and your boyfriend is different from the scenario in the show. Would you consider what the woman in the movie did acceptable, or would you also feel violated? In the scenario in the series, it would have been with a girl I wasn't interested in, someone I would sleep next to without having sex. Yes, I would feel violated. And we're not even talking about condom use yet. I've yet to see a television series where someone asks if their partner has protection. Story 11. My boyfriend and I wake each other up with sexual favors sometimes, but we both established what we're okay with, and if we're not in the mood, we just say, and that's the end of that. Story 12. I saw the same film and was a bit horrified that the 2 times she sexually assaulted him were made into a joke. It was an odd movie for sure, and it was also weird because you said she thought he was really into her when he wasn't at all. So, their perception was different. So, if there was a teachable moment in all of that, I'd say while reading the room is important, it's also worth noting your perception could be flawed. The person may not be into the things you're trying to do, so checking in with your partner is always a good idea. A simple conversation with your sexual partner while they're able to consent is useful. Would you like to be woken up with a blowjob? Is it all right if I do this next time? Story 13. It wouldn't even be possible in my case because I sleep very lightly. If you tried to touch me or move me in a way that makes this possible, I would immediately wake up. That said, the situation you described would be considered assault. I generally don't enjoy being woken up to intimate activities, even by my wife. I know it sounds appealing in theory, but in reality, it's actually more annoying in my opinion. I've only just woken up, and I probably feel very sleepy. There's no way I'll feel interested in such a situation. Story 14. If we're already in a sexual relationship, I wouldn't think it's wrong in any way, though having a conversation about it beforehand is a good idea. Initiating sex with a sleeping person outside any sexual relationship and without consent is, by definition, sexual assault or even outright rape. Gender doesn't affect the definition here. I think fluke is too kind of a term to use here. It's a manifestation of the mistaken view that all men want sex at all times and will always be happy to get some in any way and under any circumstances. A manifestation of the mistaken view that it's not rape if a woman does it to a man. Story 15. Some of the fun in waking up to a sexual act is that you didn't actually consent to it. It's not quite the same as being asked or woken up first. That doesn't mean that it's sexual harassment, although it could be. It's about reading the room and the situation and doing it with someone that puts you in a position where you can reasonably assume that it will be consensual. It's sad how we try to make consent sound so black and white when, in reality, it often strays into gray. We go off social cues and use previous knowledge to guide our decision-making. Yes, I know no means no. Protective individuals. There are a lot of women out there who want assertiveness and don't want to constantly consent. This builds over time. Sometimes this time can be extremely quick, for others it could be years. It's just one of those tricky things. The chances of something being perceived as sexual harassment increase depending on the attractiveness of the man or woman. Is it right? No. Is it reality? Yes. I don't know why we talk about consent on the internet so differently from what the actual reality is. Story 16. If my girlfriend wakes me up with affection, I'm totally fine with it. If a woman is in my bed and decides she wants to wake me up with intimacy or whatever, sure, why not? Story 17. The way you described the scene in the movie sounds more like rape than any kind of harassment. I honestly would feel very violated and taken advantage of, to say the least. To consider a double standard, imagine if the roles were reversed. This wouldn't even be a debate, and people would be outraged by the mere mention of this scenario. The problem is how people interpret consent on a non-vernacular level. Just because we get an erection doesn't mean we want or like the stimulus and therefore consent to it. I remember another topic where a woman asked if she should apologize for masturbating her male friend while he was driving. He was visibly uncomfortable with the act, but she was confused because he was tumescent and ejaculated. So she felt that he liked it even though he didn't reach out to her in the days that followed. Most people there assumed it was sexual assault, but several still argued that those who claimed this were overreacting because the guy went through the whole act. Again, that was based on the impression that as long as it is hard, it's okay because you liked it. Story 18. This is the double standard. I have a conditioned visceral reaction to the opposite, even if it was previously agreed upon. So yes, as a guy, I would feel uncomfortable. Story 19. People have been conditioned to think men are always eager for intimacy and that offering them sex is doing them a favor. Honestly, I would be disgusted and distraught if that happened to me again. Story 20. Personally, I wouldn't sleep in the same bed as a girl unless I was interested in her. I would be shocked and feel violated if a girl slept in the same bed as me and was not interested in me in that way. Story 21. Throwing a punch at another boxer in the ring is all good. Both consented and are there to fight. Punching that same guy while he's asleep in his bed is assault. Story 22. I would argue that the line is the same as it would be for a woman. It's called consent. If I, as a man, slept in a bed with a woman who was not interested in me, but I was under the impression that she was interested in me, would it be okay if I started to touch her intimately or engage in sexual activity? I think not. She needs his consent, not her impression. Same as if it were a man. Story 23. It's rape what she did. If I thought a girl was into me and I just started having relations with her in her sleep, I would be on the news and thrown in jail. I don't think it would even matter if she did like me back. I don't know if any girl would be cool with it on principle. If it's my girlfriend, it's not rape to me in any case unless I specifically told her not to do that. I would just consider it a communication issue, if anything. If it's a girl I just met, it's uncertain whether or not I was actually into her. At the same time, though, I would feel a little violated personally, but ultimately if I liked her, it would be fine. Story 24. If you talk about it beforehand, it's all good. If you don't talk about it beforehand, but you don't mind it, no harm, no foul. If you do mind and tell your partner to stop and they don't, that's not good. Now I realize why my ex is an asshole even more. Story 25. There is another movie that did that too. This is not okay. In 40 Days and 40 Nights, the movie, especially nowadays, was criticized for one scene where a man was raped by a woman, waking up to her riding him. Story 26. With two of my previous long-term partners, I've been woken up to being ridden. In both instances, I've asked them to stop, and in both instances, I was refused. One of them actually tried to hold me down so she could finish. As has been said earlier in the thread, if it's something that's been discussed prior, there shouldn't be an issue, but not everyone is the same. Story 27. My first thought is, yes, please do that at any time. But as I put myself in the situation of crashing at her house because we were drinking or something, I begin to realize that it would actually make me feel a bit unsafe if she got into my pants while I was asleep. I'd be asking myself, what else did she do while I was asleep? So yeah, always get consent in some form or another. Story 28. Sounds like that movie is going along with the stereotype of men always want sex, when clearly that isn't the case. If this was a woman, we'd confidently say it was rape. The same response should stand for the man as well. Story 29. It's incredibly easy to distinguish. If the individual prior to the sexual act gave informed consent, it is not sexual assault or rape. If that informed consent was not given, it is. Story 30. I guess it depends on the situation and the person involved. I am married, so if my wife decided to do something sexual with me while I'm asleep or wakes me up for it, I'm all for it any time. If it was a girl I'm just dating, again, I'm clearly interested, so by all means do your thing. You won't hear a complaint from me. If I'm clearly not interested in you, you wouldn't be sleeping in my bed. Therefore, this wouldn't happen. Story 31. My 21st birthday, I woke up with pants kind of on and no underwear. It was some girl I didn't know who left before I woke up. The next year, I was at a house party. A girl I knew was interested in me found me upstairs, and I woke up just as she finished and rolled off. Looking back, I don't know why I wasn't interested. There was nothing wrong with her. I could not care less, aside from any sexually transmitted disease concerns. I've been molested more at bars and parties, especially in my 30s, than any woman I know. I've had my ass slapped, hair pulled, felt up, and genitals grabbed. When I'm single, of course, I've had to throw "I have a girlfriend" out a few times, or my girlfriend was with me. So waking up to oral sex is nothing short of spectacular. Of course, society tells me I should be a sobbing wreck of a person in therapy for the last 20 years, but I laugh. I also was with a 26-year-old when I was 16. Take that, society. Story 32. Honestly, it all comes down to consent. If someone explicitly gives permission ahead of time, then it's okay. If not, then it's not okay. Obviously, this is much easier to know when in a relationship. In that case, like you said, it can be someone saying they are okay with it in general, so you don't need to talk about it every night. You know there is a blanket consent with a partner you trust. So, in the case of the movie you reference, I absolutely call that rape. It doesn't matter if he enjoys it and doesn't stop her. The moment she started without his explicit consent, she is raping him. I've seen this a lot in Hollywood, where a female starting sex without consent is not painted in a bad light because of the whole, well, no guy would turn down sex, so she can't rape him trope, which I disagree with. Basically, swap the genders. What if it was a movie where the girl wakes up and a guy she's not interested in is having sex with her? No one would hesitate to call that rape. So, why is it any different if it's the girl initiating it? It shouldn't be, but it is done all the time in movies. My go-to is Wedding Crashers. The whole scene where Vince Vaughn gets tied to the bed and the girl has sex with him even though he is saying no is rape. But everyone sees it as funny and not a big deal because they already had sex. But again, switch the genders and that scene is no longer considered funny. It's the brutal rape of a screaming woman who is tied up and gets a sock taped in her mouth.